Welcome to Leaders and Laggards.
Hi, and welcome to the episode 19 of Leaders and Laggards. And I'm pleased to be joined by Jeff Custer and Dave Swenson. And the topic that we're going to discuss this evening is emotional intelligence. Kind of what prompted me, besides some of our previous episodes that were recorded where we've touched around the fringes of emotional intelligence. One of the things that really has honed this in for me is that I'm developing a maturity model for leadership. And to me, emotional leadership is one of the key tenets that differentiates somebody from being a manager and from being a leader. And so with that, I really wanted to dig into this topic. And to me, I feel like we're all defined by our IQ, our EQ, or emotional intelligence, and our personality. So having said that, what does emotional intelligence mean to you? And Dave, I think we'll start with you.
All right, yeah. So getting ready for this particular episode, I did a lot of soul searching. So hopefully I don't get too emotional in some of my responses. But when I think about emotional intelligence, it means to me that we have some feedback about ourselves, because generally emotional intelligence is provided to you in an assessment feedback. And so if you're smart, you can turn that information into what I think is at least, or maybe even more important, which is that emotional competency in your behaviors. But I think we also got to remember that this isn't a new topic. I mean, emotional intelligence was really being theorized in the 1990s. And geez, the whole world was different, but specifically the leadership world, I think, was different in the 1990s than it is today. We had people like John Maxwell, John Cotter, Ken Blanchard. They are, at that point in time, they're all writing about, they're teaching us about, or maybe even reteaching us about leadership. We've got folks like, if I think about Timothy Galloway or the Kimsley Houses, and they're teaching us about how to be better coaches as managers and leaders. We've got real life relevant leaders in industry at that point in time, whether you're talking about Jack Welch at GE, or maybe even Herb Kelleher down at Southwest Airlines, or Paul O'Neill over at Alcoa. And boy, they're all really building that concept of how do we be those servant leaders. And emotional intelligence, I think, was an easy sell in the 1990s, but that was 25, 30 years ago. And today, if we think about some of the business leaders of the day, we've got, you've got Amazon, you've got Tesla, you've got Apple in its current iteration. And they seem to be making more decisions based on data than emotions. In 2023, emotional intelligence, or EQ, is a harder sell than it maybe would have been in the 1990s, or should be today. But what we may be left with at this point is, and I hate to say it, but it's almost, we have a buzzword that, if we're not careful, is going to be really a buzzword for the assessment providers and the coaches and the consultants. And I think that's kind of sad.
How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, Ken, I really appreciate you bringing this topic to us. It gets to me so critical for leaders to have a grasp on emotional intelligence. That I always look for dictionary definitions, kind of just ground me on what at least somebody who came up with the dictionary said that it is. And one of the definitions that I found as I was preparing was the ability to identify, understand, and manage not only your own emotions, but to influence the emotions of others. And I really like that definition. And for me, it kind of came down to this one thing. I think for leaders, it's realizing that it's not about you. It's a whole bunch more than that. We're going to get into that later. But for me, the bottom line, it's not about you. If you're a leader in an organization, that is probably the key to emotional intelligence. And I think one of the things is just kind of, as I was thinking through this too, like you, Dave, when preparing, I started to kind of think, okay, what's the difference between emotional intelligence and self-awareness? emotional intelligence is the dancing partner of self-awareness, and they just dance together. And I don't think you can necessarily separate them. And
going towards what as we were preparing, the kind of the textbook definition, as Jeff mentioned, is that emotional intelligence is personal competence and social competence. And then I think we can talk about some of the elements or the attributes of that below that. So the next question I have is, so we've kind of defined what we think emotional intelligence is. What are the benefits of emotional intelligence? And Jeff, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, really, for me, not necessarily in a particular order, but I think people, leaders that have a higher level of emotional intelligence, a higher self-awareness, are going to tend to perform better. They're going to be in better control of their behavior in difficult situations. And a couple things came to mind here. You're going to see leaders with that high level of emotional intelligence. They aren't going to have outbursts. When things aren't going well, you're not going to see them shouting at people. And the other thing that came to mind was this picture of a 2-year-old at the grocery store with their parents in the candy aisle and pounding on the cart, "I want some candy, I want some candy." And I just put in my notes, people with high emotional intelligence don't act like 2-year-olds. And people with low intelligence, I think we see people in leadership roles that do sometimes act that way. And so to me, it's just a good visual for everybody listening. Don't be a 2-year-old in the candy aisle at the grocery store. And then the other thing, Ken, that I've thought about this over the years, one of the things that I think is a benefit is if you're a leader and you're in the middle of a sticky situation, a difficult situation, a difficult conversation, and you feel your emotions getting away from you, if you have this well-developed emotional intelligence, I think you can actually step outside yourself and watch yourself in that interaction and say, wait a minute, that's not how I want to behave. And you do a mid-course correction right there in the middle of it. That, I think, is at a really high level of emotional intelligence. So you've got these strong leadership abilities. You got calm during the storm. Another thought, you're a steady rock for your team. And in the end, the benefit is you're a great role model for those people around you.
Yeah, a great point, Jeff, is that one of the attributes of self-awareness and self-management is as they explain in Emotional Intelligence 2.0, is to watch yourself like a hawk. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about, is where you get to be outside of yourself and as if you're flying above and looking down and seeing the whole big picture. What are your thoughts, Dave?
Well, so I think if you're one of those people that sees the value in becoming more emotionally competent, becoming more aware of what it is that your preferences are and how that might affect other people on the team, that awareness can impact your behaviors in a really positive way and gives you the opportunity to set the tone each and every day, no matter whether it's a good day or whether it's a challenging day. But I also got to point out that some of those most notable business managers and leaders that seem to be so darn successful today are also maybe some of the most disagreeable SOBs you'll ever meet in your life, right? And so, I'm pointing right at Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos with that statement. And so it's our job as a leader to, point back to, this is how we do things here.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, just to add on to that, I mean, I think you see that, okay, they're very successful, but are they very successful at risk for the short run? And what's the wake of damage they leave behind?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I'll give you that. They're very successful people, but what are all the people in the ditches behind them that got shoved aside? And over the long run, is that the most effective way to lead?
No, that's a good point. I mean, so I do know I've got a couple of pretty close contacts that work at Tesla, so I know a little bit about what it's like working there. And it's not, it's not that ideal state that maybe we are all thinking about when we thought about the Toyota production system, where we have respect for people. But the point is, he is very successful today. And so some people are drawn to those numbers or those shiny lights. And so it's our job as a leader to say, yeah, for now, maybe the limelight is there, but we all know the right thing to do is here. So I need to set the example.
Yeah, and again, going back to the emotional intelligence 2.0, one of the statistics that they point out in there is that EQ is so critical to success that it accounts for 58% of performance in all types of jobs. Yeah. And that it's the foundation for a host of critical skills. And when I think about leadership and also about emotional intelligence, you come up with words like empathy, innovation, agility, and trust. And those are, again, some of the key attributes and the tickets to the dance to be a leader.
Right.
And I think that, the innovation, I think, goes towards what you were talking about with Bezos and Elon Musk. That kind of gives us a high level overview. So now, what are some practical ways to implement emotional intelligence? And this is really more focused on you as an individual leader. And then we'll have a follow on from later, the next question, more from a team perspective, but really from an individual leader perspective. What are some practical ways to implement? Dave, we'll start with you.
Becoming more effective with EQ for me is like becoming more effective with a lot of other things. And that means, first and foremost, internally, you've got to decide that the juice is worth the squeeze, right? And if the juice is worth the squeeze, I think that if this is an individual growth, if that's primarily where you're at today is I want to grow individually with my EQ, well, then I would recommend create a BHAG around that theme. So what does that look like in, relatively over a period of time? What would it take to even get there? And then I would start a regime of some kind of daily iteration towards that goal. So, I've talked about it before on the podcast. I'm an advocate of doing that daily personal plus delta, but I'm also an advocate of doing a daily iteration of the improvement kata. So either way, I think you can make a lot of gain on your own. You can self-coach your way to some pretty good results, but it all starts with understanding, yes, it's worth the effort. And what does that plan look like?
Yeah, and I think, along the lines of what you were just talking about, Dave, is revisiting your values, making sure you understand your values, and then revisiting your values on a regular basis. And to your point, at the end of the day, plus delta, journal, whatever your method is, how did my behavior and my response to stimuli and emotions align with my values today, and where did it differ, and what can I learn from it? And practice makes a habit. Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just to add on, I think I came up with maybe more of a list of very specific things that fit into what Dave just said. Is like, Dave's like, here's this framework. So what things can you practice? Right. One of the things I think is important when we talk about a lot of these leadership things is sometimes people may feel like, well, I either have it or I don't. And I just encourage people to don't think that way. Think of these things that I can get better at these. I can practice these things like Dave's talking about, and some ideas for practicing. One of the things I put down was be open-minded. A lot of times we come at things, I have really strong opinions about some things, and how do we learn to temper those strong things? I'm not saying you have to change your opinion, but be willing to think about what somebody else's position is. I think another thing is know your strengths and weaknesses. It really a key thing. If you start to understand, okay, I'm pretty good at this. I'm not good at everything. None of us are good at everything. And I think leaders that know their weaknesses, understand their weaknesses, acknowledge them, are going to be more emotionally intelligent. It's like, okay, I'm not good at that. I'm okay with that. And I fill that gap with somebody else on my team or somebody around me. How about this? Seek and give feedback. Ask people, how am I doing? How is my, do you think I reacted to that situation? It kind of goes along with being self-disciplined. How many people do you guys think of when I say they don't have that internal filter
right.
come to mind? being self-disciplined around developing that internal filter of, yep, I might be thinking something, but I know I'm not going to say it. A couple other ones I had, it really gets at empathy. And a better way to say empathy for me is to really walk a mile in someone else's shoes. What everybody's having their own struggles, issues, everybody's got their individual things. And I think we can be quick to judge. We can be quick to do a lot of things with others. Understanding and trying to say, what are they going through? What's it look like from their side helps us be more emotionally intelligent. Again, I don't think you need to change necessarily what you think or your position, but it's really understanding. And I think a way you can do all of these things is to work at becoming a better listener. And coupled with that, you can learn to ask better and better questions. I mean, that's a whole bunch of stuff to work on. But if you practice those things in the framework that Dave outlined, over time, I think you're going to become much more emotionally intelligent.
Yeah, and I think one of the keys of that is if you're going through and you're really trying to develop your emotional intelligence, you can't try and improve 8 or 9 things all at once. You really need to pick one,
right,
or 2, and really focus on those and practice until it becomes a habit. And then once you've gotten to the point where you know better, and some of the examples are, know who and what pushes your buttons. If you can practice that and get to the point where you refuse to be offended and you refuse to let your buttons be pushed, then you can move on to the next area.
I like that, Ken. Kind of being aware of, like when do you feel your blood pressure starting to rise and your ears start turning red? You got to learn to see that in yourself and know what that, like you're saying, what things trigger that, and how do I practice self-control?
And some of the other, and again, if you go in and you look at the traditional definition of emotional intelligence, you have self-awareness, self-management. Those are more on the individual side. And then it's social awareness and relationship management and how you are interacting and dealing with others. It comes down to, for self-awareness, it's kind of satisfaction. Are you happy with the person you are and how you respond? Self-management is don't talk behind people's backs and have patience. Social awareness is really about your feelings, and relationship management, is empathy, stress management. And one of the examples that I came across when I was preparing is when you talk about empathy and walking in someone else's shoes, you don't put their shoes on over yours. I mean, because that would be kind of clunky to walk that way, right? No, you have to actually take your shoes off first and then put their shoes on, which translates into really understanding where they're coming from. And you have to put yourself in that mindset. So the last one is, there's a lot of information, and going back to like Dave mentioned early on, where this was really kind of a buzzword and a big thing in the 1990s and early 2000s. There's a lot of information out there about how you can do better from emotional intelligence yourself. But one of the things when I asked some of the people in my membership group, when you think about emotional intelligence, what would you want to know more about? And one of the things that we came up with was the question is, as a leader, how do you move the EQ needle from a group or team perspective? So Jeff, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, it makes me think, Ken, of one model I like to use in training called the Johari window. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Johari window, but it's kind of funny. It was invented by two guys, one named Joe and one named Harry, and they called it Johari window. And it really is a relationship building model. It's about what you know about yourself, what you don't know about yourself, what others know about you, and what others don't know about you. So there's kind of 4 quadrants to this model. A lot of times, I think, Kim, what you're talking about, when there are things that are unknown to you and maybe known to others, those are your blind spots. And I think a good place to start when you're working with your team is to really talk about that concept of this emotional intelligence. There may be pieces of it that are unknown to you. You don't know about it. You don't maybe even realize that you're doing these things. So to me, the first step is to talk about it. Make sure the team knows what it is. Make sure the team understands why it's important. I think then you start setting expectations around it that, hey, everybody on our team, we want you to be really high on this emotional intelligence scale. And let's commit to each other that we're going to practice. And I think then you follow that up with feedback to the team. How are we doing? How are we doing good? Where still are our gaps? And you go back to this Johari model, and the things that are unknown to you and unknown to the unknown about you to others is really our opportunity to be very creative and grow. And so I think awareness and discussion around these things is going to help you really grow to be a strong, emotionally intelligent team.
What are your thoughts, Dave?
Again, as a leader, and even in my own life, I think the goal with emotional intelligence for me is always to develop or strengthen that emotional competency. Right. So when I think about this question, it makes me think of a quote from Timothy Galloway where he said, people often say it's not that I don't know what to do, it's that I don't know, or that I don't do what I know. Right. And so if you, as a leader, if you want to spread that emotional competence among your team, well, then you've got to do that by setting the tone. That for me means that when you notice that your behaviors have impacted someone on the team, it's your job to follow up with that person. And it might be a positive impact and it might be something that you need to correct, but it's your job to follow up with that person. And then if you notice a behavior in someone else that's had an impact as well, that maybe there's the need to have some one-on-one feedback conversation, you can't shirk that responsibility. It is your job to have that conversation with the person and talk about, is this really what we're trying to get accomplished? Or, good job, I caught you doing it right. And I wanted to just tell you that that's a good job.
Yeah, one of the things as I was researching this one, because I really do believe that there's a gap in this area, is one of the things I came across, which I really liked, was encourage exceptional listening skills. And, and that's really, we've talked on some of our previous Zoomcast about listening for understanding and not to respond and don't interrupt. And then that kind of got me into that, how do you want to build that team and work on it as together. And I came across a couple of, one of them was the 4 C's: clarity, connection, commitment, and contribution. And then if you do that well, it really will lead you towards better conflict management and decision making. And these are all the things that are really kind of build up and help you be better at emotional intelligence. So those are the questions I had. We'll start with you, Dave, this time. Any closing thoughts that you want to share with our listeners about emotional intelligence and leadership?
I actually kind of want to split the comment into 2 sections. So for the listeners to this podcast that are maybe in that camp of, hey, there may be a coach consultant themselves, I want to have them realize that when we're having discussions around emotional intelligence, this is one area where you really can take advantage of people, right? So remember that your job as that coach or that consultant is to add value to your client, right? Not to make money off of them. And on the other side, if you're that individual or you're that team that's after developing, again, that emotional competency and understanding emotional intelligence and the impact we have on one another, then realize it's your job to facilitate this journey. And so, yeah, you may reach out to someone for help, but I think it starts with education. And if you do ask for help, I would recommend reaching out to somebody that's kind of agnostic about emotional intelligence and not maybe tied to one of these houses that does the assessments. And just realize that this is your job and it's not something to be farmed out to someone else.
Again, for all the technical skills that people can bring to a job, if they don't bring a high level of emotional intelligence along with that, I think they're going to really struggle to be effective. And that's why I think this topic, I was so happy that you brought it up, why I think it's so critical for leaders to understand these things. And again, like I'd said earlier, it's something that you can practice. You're not stuck where you're at. The things that we talked about here in the last few minutes are an encouragement to leaders that look in the mirror, figure out where you're at. Ken, like you said, pick a couple things and decide, I'm going to improve on this. And if you continue to do that, your self-awareness is going to continue to rise. And I think you're just going to continue to become more and more effective as a leader.
My thoughts are, Jeff, kind of what you mentioned early on is that self-awareness is kind of the key. And to me, emotional intelligence, if you think of it like an onion, you peel back one layer at a time and you can work on it, and you just can keep practice and improve in each of those areas and just keep peeling the onion to get to the true you. So with that, on behalf of Dave, Jeff, and myself, thank you for listening to Leaders and Laggards, and see you next time.
Thanks for watching, and remember, leadership matters.